Hello, friends. There is a law that has existed since 1984 that most funeral homes hope you never open your mouth and ask about. It gives you the right to demand a full price list, refuse to give your name, and walk away without spending a dollar. Almost nobody uses it, and that is exactly why the industry has been able to charge some families 3 and 4 times more than others for the identical service in the identical city in the same week. Stay with me because today, that changes. There is also a bill sitting in Congress right now that could let you pay for a funeral using money you already have saved and never even considered spending on this. There is a brand new way to be laid to rest that barely existed a decade ago, and it costs thousands less than what your parents were sold. And there is one specific sentence, that funeral homes have been telling grieving families for years that is not actually true. And once you hear it, you will never fall for it again. I am going to walk you through exactly what is real, what is only proposed, and what is pure pressure dressed up as law, so your family never hands over a single extra dollar out of fear or exhaustion. Before we start, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because this channel exists to tell you what actually changed, backed by what regulators actually documented, not what sounds scary in a headline. Let's get into it. Here's why this deserves 30 calm minutes of your attention instead of 0. Ask around your own circle right now, and you will find this pattern faster than you'd expect. Someone's aunt paid $4,000 more than she had to. Someone's neighbor was told a casket was legally required for cremation, and it was not. These are not rare stories from some other part of the country. They are common enough that the federal government built an entire rule book to stop them, more than 40 years ago, and that rule book is still the single most useful document almost nobody has ever actually read. Here's what makes this urgent in 2026 specifically. Cremation has now overtaken burial as the majority choice in America, which means the rules families actually need to know have quietly shifted under their feet. A real bill is moving through Washington that could unlock savings you already have. And 2 brand new ways to handle final arrangements are now legal in a growing list of states, options your parents never had on the table at all. When someone dies, the family left behind is not thinking clearly. They have not slept. They are juggling phone calls, plane tickets, and relatives arriving from 3 time zones, all while trying to process a loss that has not fully landed yet. That is precisely the moment a number of providers, not all, but enough to matter, have learned to make optional purchases sound mandatory and bury real prices behind vague language until a family has already emotionally committed. So let's count down the 5 things that matter most right now, starting with a right you already legally have and almost certainly have never once used. Number 5, the price list right you can use today. Since 1984, federal law gives you the right to walk into any funeral home in America or call one on the phone and demand a written, itemized price list, with 0 obligation to buy anything and 0 requirement to give your name first. That right exists today. It is yours. Most people simply never use it because they don't know it's there, and funeral homes are certainly not advertising it. Here's the part that actually is a live 2026 story. The one thing that federal law does not yet require is posting those prices online. The FTC has been formally studying an amendment to close that gap for years, and its own research found that more than 60% of funeral home websites list little to no pricing, even though close to half of families now start their search on the internet before they ever pick up a phone. That amendment has not passed as of today. It remains proposed, not law. A handful of states, California among them, already require online price posting on their own, and the price differences that transparency reveals are not small. Multiple watchdog studies have documented spreads of 300% and 400% between providers in the very same city for the identical service. There is no quality difference that explains that gap. It is simply the price nobody could see. Action step. Before you ever set foot in a funeral home, call at least 2 of them and ask for pricing over the phone. You do not owe them your name, your address, or a promise to visit. If a provider refuses to answer, hangs up, or insists you come in first, that refusal is itself a violation of federal law. Treat it as your answer about whether to use them. And here's the detail almost nobody mentions. You are also entitled to walk in, request that price list in person, and keep it permanently, with no strings attached, even if you are not currently arranging a funeral for anyone. Journalists have used this right to investigate providers. Consumer advocates have used it to build public comparisons. You can use it the exact same way, simply to build your own family's comparison folder months or years before anyone actually needs it on a calm afternoon instead of the worst week of your life. Number 4. The bundling trap, already illegal, not newly banned. You may have heard that funeral homes were recently stopped from forcing you to buy a full package just to get one service you actually want. That protection is not new. It has been federal law since the funeral rule was strengthened in 1994. Funeral homes are required to let you buy individual goods and services separately, and they cannot make purchasing one item conditional on purchasing others you never asked for. The reason this still trips families up in 2026 is not that the law changed. It's that enforcement depends almost entirely on families knowing the right questions to ask in a moment when they are least equipped to ask them. A provider says a specific package is how we do it here, and a grieving family, unaware they have any other option, simply agrees. Action step. Ask directly in these words. Can I purchase the single item without buying anything else? Federal law says yes, they must let you. If they say no, that is a documented violation you can report at reportfraud.ftc.gov, and it's worth doing, because that report becomes part of the pattern regulators use to act on repeat offenders. Number 3. The "it's legally required" line, never simply accept it. This is the one that costs families the most money, and it has been explicitly illegal since the Funeral Rule's 1994 update. No state in this country requires embalming by law in the vast majority of circumstances. There are narrow exceptions, mostly involving specific interstate transport situations, but routine embalming for a standard service is not one of them. Similarly, no state requires a casket for cremation. An alternative container is legally sufficient everywhere, and providers are required by federal regulation to tell you that option exists and to make it available. If a representative tells you a service is legally required, current federal rule already obligates them to be able to identify the specific law and jurisdiction behind that claim. If they cannot name it, the claim is not just questionable, it is presumptively deceptive, and you are entitled to walk away or ask for the alternative. Embalming alone can run several $100s, and it is one of the single largest sources of unnecessary spending in this entire industry, precisely because so few families know they are allowed to say no. Refrigeration is an accepted substitute in nearly every situation where a body needs to be held for a short period before burial or cremation, and providers are aware of that fact even when they don't volunteer it. If you want a private family viewing without embalming, you are allowed to ask for exactly that, and a provider who tells you it's simply not possible is giving you a policy preference dressed up as a legal one. The difference between those two things is worth thousands of dollars, and it is worth asking the question out loud in the room, even when it feels awkward to push back. Number 2. Disposition options your parents' generation never had. Cremation crossed the majority mark years ago and is projected to reach roughly 63% of all dispositions in the United States by the latest national data, and it continues climbing. The cost gap explains why. A traditional full-service funeral with burial, including professional fees, casket, preparation, a chapel service, and cemetery costs like the plot and opening and closing fees, typically runs between $8,000 and $12,000 nationally, and considerably higher in major metro areas like New York or Los Angeles. Direct cremation, without embalming, viewing, or an on-site ceremony, generally runs between $1,500 and $2,500, and the family is free to hold a memorial anywhere, on any timeline, once the immediate shock has settled. Beyond that, 2 newer options are now on the table for families with strong personal or environmental preferences. Alkaline hydrolysis, sometimes called water cremation or aquamation, uses water, gentle heat, and an alkaline solution instead of flame, and it is now legally recognized in roughly half the states in the country, with pricing generally comparable to or modestly above traditional cremation. Human composting, formerly called natural organic reduction, is now legal in a growing list of states, including Washington, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, New York, Nevada, Arizona, Maryland, Delaware, Minnesota, Maine, Georgia, New Jersey, and California, though California's facilities are not expected to open until 2027. The process transforms the body into usable soil over several weeks, at a cost generally between $5,000 and $7,000, well below traditional burial. Action step. Compare at least 2 providers on each disposition type you're considering. Availability still varies enormously by state. Legal on paper does not always mean available down the street. Ask directly whether the process happens on site or requires transfer to a neighboring state, because the answer changes both the cost and the timeline. Number 1. The bill in Congress and the planning move almost nobody talks about. There is a real, currently pending piece of legislation called the Funeral Coverage Act, introduced in the House as H.R. 2436. If it passes, it would allow up to $5,000 from a health savings account to be used tax-free for funeral and burial expenses, something that is explicitly not allowed under current IRS rules. As of today, this bill has not become law. It has been introduced, and industry groups are actively advocating for it, but nothing has been finalized. So do not assume the money is usable yet. Health savings accounts were built around qualified medical expenses as the IRS defines them, and funeral costs have simply never fit that definition, no matter how directly tied to end of life they obviously are. That's the exact gap the Funeral Coverage Act is trying to close, and it's why industry groups like the National Funeral Directors Association have been pushing for its passage across more than one session of Congress. Right now, using HSA funds for a funeral is still treated the same as any other non-qualified withdrawal, taxes and a potential penalty, not a clean, tax-free payment. Separately, there is a planning strategy that already exists today and that far too few seniors are told about. Many states allow you to set aside a specific amount of money in an irrevocable prepaid funeral trust, and those funds are typically excluded from the asset calculations used to determine Medicaid eligibility for long-term care. The exact amount varies significantly by state, so this is not one-size-fits-all advice. But for a senior thinking ahead about the possibility of needing Medicaid-funded care, this is a completely legitimate way to guarantee funds exist for final expenses without that money counting against you first. One important caution here: because pre-need funeral contracts are regulated by state law rather than the federal funeral rule, the consumer protections around prepayment vary a great deal from state to state. Before you prepay anything, ask specifically how your funds are held, whether they're in a state-regulated trust or an insurance product with you as the named beneficiary, and whether the arrangement is portable if the provider closes or is sold. Action step: raise both of these, the HSA legislation and the irrevocable funeral trust, in your next conversation with an elder law attorney or financial advisor. The trust is available to you right now. The HSA option might be soon. Track the bill's progress the same way you'd track anything that could affect your own money. Closing: what protects your family? Let me leave you with the 5 things that actually protect your family, starting today. First, request the written general price list from any funeral home before discussing anything else. And don't give your name first if you're only asking by phone. Second, call at least 2, ideally 3 providers before committing to anything, whether you're planning ahead or arranging services at the time of need, because the price spread for identical services in the same city can be enormous. Third, if anyone tells you a service is required by law, ask them to name the specific law. If they can't, that claim does not hold up. Fourth, if you're doing any advanced planning, write your preferences down clearly and tell at least 2 people you trust exactly where that document lives. Fifth, if you ever feel pressured, confused, or rushed during any conversation with a provider, you're allowed to say, "I need to think about this," and leave. Nothing in federal law requires you to decide anything on the spot, and a provider who creates urgency where none actually exists is telling you something important about how they operate. Trust that signal. The families who end up overpaying and regretting decisions are almost always the ones who had 0 information walking in and no time to think. A decision made calmly, with real information, beats a decision made in grief nearly every single time. None of what I covered today is meant to alarm you. It is meant to hand you the leverage that already legally belongs to you, most of which has existed since 1984 and simply isn't well known. Plus, a clear-eyed look at what is genuinely new and what is still just a proposal in Washington. Share this with whoever in your family handles this kind of planning, and subscribe so that when the online pricing rule or the Funeral Coverage Act actually moves, you hear about it here first, in plain language, with the facts checked before they ever reach you. Sourcing and disclosure. Federal Trade Commission Funeral Rule 16 CFR Part 453 and FTC Consumer Guidance. FTC's 2020-2026 Funeral Rule Review Proceedings on proposed online pricing amendments. National Funeral Directors Association cremation rate projections. Cremation Association of North America State-by-state alkaline hydrolysis data, March 2026. State legislative trackers on natural organic reduction. H.R. 2436, the Funeral Coverage Act, 119th Congress. This video is for general educational purposes and is not legal, financial, or medical advice. Consult a qualified elder law attorney or financial advisor for guidance specific to your state and situation.